Hey everyone, Chaos here. Today I'm going to go over everything that's going on with World of Warcraft, the War Within, and specifically the Liberation of Undermine raid. I've been lucky enough to get a ton of info from theory crafters, top guild testers, and community discussions. I'll go over which classes and specializations are looking good, who's getting left behind, and how each role is shaping up in PvE. I'll cover tanks, healers, melee DPS, and ranged DPS, all in one plain text explanation, so you don't have to dig around multiple sites and spreadsheets. I'll also throw in my 2 cents along the way, because each tier, S, A, B, C, has some reasoning behind it, and sometimes it's not just about raw numbers, but utility, survivability, and overall raid synergy. Let's start with tanks, because they're the front line of any raid encounter. Right now, 3 specs are looking good in the top tier, and those are Blood Death Knights, Protection Paladins, and Protection Warriors. Blood DKs have always had that self-healing and the ability to handle unexpected damage spikes. With all the changes in the War Within, they're retaining that strength. Deathstrike is still a monster for healing back damage, and they bring major group utility in the form of Gorefiend's Grasp for mass grip, and the possibility of a battle res if you don't have other classes to fill that role. The only downside, if we can even call it that, is a Blood DK has to manage their cooldowns so they don't get overwhelmed, but most experienced DK players know exactly how to do that. Protection Paladin is another tanking monster. They bring a ton of group utility with all the blessings. Blessing of Protection, Spell Warding, Sacrifice, and they still have Lay on Hands to bail out the raid in critical moments. They have Devotion Aura for a gentle but constant raid-wide damage reduction, and if no Holy Paladin is present, that becomes extremely valuable. Prot Paladins are very sturdy with strong active mitigation and consistent healing through talents, and they pull respectable damage for a tank. That's a big plus during progression when every bit of DPS counts. Protection Warriors are just pure physical mitigation beasts, and they're doing some surprising damage. They bring Battle Shout to boost your raid's attack power, Rallying Cry to help the team survive bursts of raid damage, and they can block incoming attacks with Shield Block. Warrior tanks also get Ignore Pain, which is a great absorb for smoothing out incoming hits. They're doing a lot of damage right now compared to other tanks, which can speed up kill times, and they're more straightforward to play than a Brewmaster if you want something that's rock solid. Below those 3 S tier tanks, I put Brewmaster Monk and Guardian Druid in A tier. Brewmasters have the iconic stagger mechanic, which basically turns massive hits into a DOT they can manage with Purifying Brew. That can make them feel almost unkillable with good timing. They bring the Mystic Touch debuff that increases physical damage all enemies take, which is a nice bonus for a raid heavy with physical DPS. However, Brewmasters can be a bit complex to manage, and if you're not used to balancing your rotation and resources, it might be a little intimidating. Guardian Druids are simpler in some ways, but still really effective. They have high armor and health pools, straightforward active mitigation, and Mark of the Wild for 3% versatility to the raid, which is always helpful. Their single target damage is also much better now than in some of the prior expansions, so if you see a Guardian Druid, they're not just a giant teddy bear that soaks up hits. They can actually contribute decently to your raid's DPS totals. Vengeance Demon Hunter ends up in B tier right now. It's not bad, it's just overshadowed. It brings Chaos Brand, which is the 5% magic damage taken debuff, but typically if your raid has a Havoc Demon Hunter, that debuff is already covered, so the main reason you'd bring a Vengeance tank is if you specifically want more mobility in your tank lineup, or the utility of sigils. They do find damage, but the self-sustain can be a bit inconsistent, and they can be spike prone if they don't time their defensive windows properly. They're still a viable tank overall, just not as highly coveted in a typical progression setting right now. Moving on to the healers, we see Mistweaver Monks and Disciplined Priests in S tier. Mistweavers have insane healing throughput, especially with the damage to healing conversions from their Ancient Teachings playstyle. They also do surprising amounts of damage for a healer, which is a big plus when you're trying to speed up encounters. The only real catch is they don't have a big raid-wide defensive cooldown like a Spirit Link Totem or Power Word Barrier, but their raw healing and damage contribution is so high they're topping a lot of logs. Disciplined Priests, on the other hand, focus on preventing damage, which is sometimes even more powerful than healing it. They ramp up with Atonement, dish out damage that translates into healing, and they have massive cooldowns like Pain Suppression and Power Word Barrier. Power Infusion is still a huge reason to bring a Disc Priest, because buffing your top DPS with a haste steroid can be fight changing. In A tier for healers, we have Restoration Druids and Holy Priests. Resto Druids are all about layering Ho-Ts, covering the raid in rejuvenations and wild growths, and they're strong and sustain heavy fights with constant ticking damage. They also have Stampeding Roar to help the raid with mobility, and Innervate to give free spellcasting to themselves or another healer. Holy Priest is your classic throughput healer, powerful single target heals, large AoE heals with spells like Divine Hymn and Sanctify, and Guardian Spirit to save someone from certain death. They do, however, lack some of the damage reduction tools that Disc brings, so they're more reliant on pure healing output, but they're still popular for their consistency and simplicity. In B tier are Preservation Evokers and Restoration Shamans. Preservation Evoker was once absolutely dominating in Dragonflight's early season, but got hit with some nerfs. It still excels in burst healing phases, especially with abilities like Rewind that revert recent damage taken by the whole raid. They're also extremely mobile and can do short-range healing effectively, but that 25-yard range can be a problem on big spread fights. Restoration Shaman is a reliable raid healer and provides some of the best utility with things like Spirit Link Totem, Ancestral Protection Totem, and other totems that can handle various mechanics. The main caveat is their total throughput might lag behind the top tiers, and if the raid is spread out, they can't always capitalize on their chain heal or healing rain potential. Finally, Holy Paladin is in C tier for now, mainly due to tuning issues that leave it feeling mana starved and lacking the healing output it used to have. That said, Holy Paladins still have Devo Aura, which is fantastic for reducing damage taken across the board. They also have the most hands, Blessing of Protection, Sacrifice, Freedom, and can literally save a raid from wipe scenarios with Lay on Hands. Unfortunately, the numbers just aren't there compared to other healers in the current iteration, so they're not widely considered a top pick unless the raid absolutely needs Devotion Aura from a Paladin. Now let's talk melee DPS, my favorite category to analyze because these specs can sometimes live or die by how friendly the raid mechanics are to melee uptime. Right now in S tier we have Arms Warriors, Havoc Demon Hunters, Windwalker Monks, and Subtlety Rogues. Arms Warriors came out of the gate strong in the War Within's tests with big buffs to their damage. They have killer burst windows and an absolutely monstrous execute phase that can help end boss fights quicker once they drop below a certain health threshold. Havoc DH is all about high mobility, good cleave, and strong single target. They also bring darkness for a party-wide damage reduction that can occasionally save lives. Windwalker Monk has historically been an AoE powerhouse, but now it's significantly stronger in single target too, which puts it in an excellent spot. Subtlety Rogue is the go-to for crazy on-demand burst and priority target deletion, which helps in fights with lethal adds or short burn phases. In A tier we have Fury Warrior, Enhancement Shaman, Retribution Paladin, Outlaw Rogue, and Feral Druid. Fury Warrior is consistent, has decent self-sustain, and can do well on cleave fights. They just aren't matching the raw power that Arms is showing. Enhancement Shaman is also quite flexible with big AoE potential, especially with Maelstrom weapon procs, but is reliant on some degree of RNG. Retribution Paladin got a big rework in the latter part of Dragonflight, and now in War Within, it's sitting at a respectable point with significant burst via Avenging Wrath. Outlaw Rogue has strong sustained damage, especially in cleave scenarios thanks to Blade Flurry, and like any rogue spec, it brings some of the best defensive cooldowns in the game. Feral Druid is also in that bracket, harnessing powerful bleeds and good single target while offering high mobility and off heals. All these A tier specs are highly viable, just lacking a bit of the over-the-top advantages that S tier has. In B tier for melee DPS we have Unholy and Frost Death Knights. Both bring some strong tools like Death Grip and Anti-Magic Zone, which can be super useful raid utilities. Unholy has incredible burst if everything lines up with Army of the Dead and Summon Gargoyle, but tends to suffer if forced to move at inopportune times, and can lose a lot of its ramp if a boss shifts phases. Frost DK is more about cleave and steady damage, but again, mobility is a weakness, and heavy movement fights can cause them to lag behind specs that can keep up more easily. They're still playable, but you won't see them topping meters like Havoc or Arms. Down in C tier, we have Assassination Rogue and Survival Hunter. Assassination thrives in long single target fights, but many of the Liberation of Undermine encounters favor fast bursts or multiple targets, which kind of leaves Assassination behind. It doesn't bring the same cleave or priority target bursting that Subtlety can deliver, Survival Hunter is similarly in a rough place. While it has some tools for good single target and decent AoE with its bombs, it doesn't bring the impressive group utility or raw damage that other melee can deliver. Hunters in general default to Beast Mastery or Marksmanship if they want to do top tier raid DPS, so Survival has a tough time finding its place right now. Let's wrap up with ranged DPS. In S tier, we have Devastation Evoker, Fire Mage, Beast Mastery Hunter, and Shadow Priest. Devastation Evoker is hitting hard in both burst and sustain windows, although they have that 25-yard limitation, which can be tricky. Fire Mage is back on top after some big buffs to Combustion and Ignite, making them a real menace in short burn phases, as well as longer fights where they can weave in big combustion windows. Beast Mastery Hunter can do nearly full DPS while constantly moving, which is a huge advantage in raid fights with complicated mechanics. And Shadow Priest has that wonderful ability to multi-dot and deal very steady damage across multiple targets, while still providing raid utility and respectable single target if you manage your cooldowns correctly. For A tier, we have Affliction Warlock, Elemental Shaman, Marksmanship Hunter, and Destruction Warlock. Affliction Warlocks excel at spread multi-target fights, applying DOTs and then converting that into Malefic Rapture spam. Elemental Shaman can adapt to single target or AoE, has insane burst potential with Stormkeeper, and brings useful totems. Marksmanship Hunter, since it was updated, has found some strong burst windows with True Shot, and even though they need to stand still more than a BM Hunter, they can deliver huge hits with aimed shot and rapid fire combos. Destruction Warlock absolutely wrecks two target situations with Havoc and can do well on stacked AoE with Rain of Fire, though it might feel a little bit hampered if forced to move constantly. B tier for ranged sees Demonology Warlock, Frost Mage, and Augmentation Evoker. Demonology is all about ramping up your demonic army, which can be very powerful if you get the timing right, but certain fights in Liberation of Undermine don't lend themselves well to slow ramp specs, plus any movement can hamper your cast times. Frost Mage is consistent and can do decent cleave with Blizzard and Frozen Orb, but lacks the bigger and flashier burst windows of fire right now. Augmentation Evoker is in a unique position. It's all about buffing allies, so its personal DPS is actually quite low after significant nerfs. However, it still dramatically boosts the overall raid's damage, so typically you want one Aug Evoker around for that reason, even if their personal parse looks underwhelming. Down in C tier, we have Arcane Mage and Balanced Druid. Arcane Mage is extremely dependent on big burst cooldowns. If you time them perfectly and the fight doesn't demand a lot of movement at the wrong moment, you can output monstrous damage. But realistically, in these high movement fights, Arcane often can't keep up and falls behind Fire Mage's reliable combustions. Balanced Druid has strong AoE with Starfall and can do a bit of everything, plus they bring Mark of the Wild, which your group almost always wants. But they suffer from ramp issues on single target and are also pretty cast heavy, so intense movement phases can really cripple their total output. That's why you'll usually see them near the bottom of the charts, despite the fact that they bring so much utility and support. If you love a certain spec, don't be discouraged if you don't see it in S tier or A tier. WoW has always been a game where a skilled player can make a lower tier spec work wonders, especially if the raid composition complements it well, or if the fight aligns with that spec's strengths. Also, synergy is huge. Just because a particular spec is rated lower overall doesn't mean you can't find success if it rounds out your raid's buffs, debuffs, or utility in a way that helps the entire team. That being said, if you're trying to join a top guild or you really want that cutting edge progression as fast as possible, it helps to know who's dominating and why. So you want to do the Liberation of Undermine? You might have heard about a boosting service called ChaosBoost. It's a boosting site that does runs for the new raid, so you can buy a Liberation of Undermine run if you want a quick and guaranteed way to see the content or get raid gear. These types of boosting services have been around for a while, and ChaosBoost is one of those that offer professional raid carries with experienced teams that know all the strategies. Of course, many people still prefer to progress with their own guilds or pugs for the sense of accomplishment and the thrill of taking down bosses step by step, but if you're short on time or want that loot fast, ChaosBoost might be an option. They'll do the heavy lifting while you get your character in on kills, achievements, and gear. That said, it's up to you how you want to play the game. Some people love the challenge of wiping and learning, others just want that shiny gear in their bags. Either way, the option is there if you want to jump straight into the hardest difficulties of the Liberation of Undermine raid. If you found this helpful or interesting, feel free to share your own thoughts on what specs you think might still be underrated or due for a buff before release. I personally love seeing how things change during the final stages of testing, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few specs like Vengeance Demon Hunter or Holy Paladin get some late tuning love. And with that, I want to thank you for sticking around, reading this entire breakdown, and just being part of the overall conversation. Until next time, stay chaotic